All or nothing. Real beauty exposed. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the All or Nothing podcast. I'm Dr. Heather Anderson, and I'm here to talk about the different shades of cosmetic medicine. And today we're going to go a little bit left field and talk about the non-linear career, because I think it's an important topic to cover. The reason it's so important is because the non-linear career goes against the grain of many expectations of careers, in particular medicine, but also I would argue that it populates to other kind of, industries as well. When we are early in our career, we naturally want to know which box we're going to fit into. I certainly was one of those people, where you're sort of primed to be like, pick a lane, pick a lane, pick a lane. And when you kind of go down that path, you sort of feel like, okay, to be able to get to that end point, I'm going to have to make a lot of sacrifices along the way. And that's a hard thing because it means that, you have to sort of really push through, and it can definitely get you to goals that you want. But sometimes as time goes by, you start to, have things accumulate in your life, whether that be family, friends, travel, other things that are non-work related, start to come in, and you start to wonder, where do you fit and how does that prioritize? And that's because, when you have, say, children, it changes things significantly. You have a lot of, physiological and mental health changes, but also, you have time changes as well. So you've gone from having a lot of time that you can invest in a career to, time now that you want to invest in your children, and that becomes really hard to kind of work out. And so your life does become quite non-linear. And it's interesting in that careers don't often reflect that. And cosmetic medicine for me is an example of how my career became nonlinear. So I'll share the story of where I kind of came from and my origins, because I think it's powerful in the sense that I kind of wish that when I was starting in my career that someone had kind of guided me a little bit through the fact that I have a lot more power to make my choices than what I realized. So, when I was 11, I decided I wanted to be a doctor. I actually wanted to be a forensic pathologist of all things, because I was very interested in, causes of death and things. I'm quite left field from cosmetic medicine, but I was very interested in that, and I kind of, set myself that goal. Worked very hard in school to be able to go through that path of, doing well in the certain subjects to get into medicine, and medicine, hard to get into. Certainly, sometimes you have to try multiple times to get in, and you get into that point. And then again, when you start medicine, you start to think, okay, well, now we've got to pick a lane in medicine. And my initial idea of being this forensic pathologist suddenly got turned on its head because, the idea of doing surgery was very sexy, which it is to a lot of, doctors, or certainly junior people wanting to become doctors. It was interesting. I still remember the very first day of med school where we got introduced to, obviously, the whole program, but they also said that 50% of the doctors in the class will become GPs, and everyone laughed. And I still remember that because we all thought, how ridiculous. Who wants to be a GP? Because, hospital specialty surgery, the sexier stuff really excites you, We're looking at Grey's Anatomy, we're looking at ER, we're looking at all the things that, make people feel excited about medicine. We want the fast-paced, cool stuff where we can come home with better work stories, that sort of thing. So when you're young and you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, you very much go into that path thinking, this is what I'm going to do. And I guess, your life is very different then. When you're young, you have this perception of how it's going to be. And I think a lot of us have this ingrained idea that, okay, I'm going to, have a job, and then I'm going to get married, and then I'm going to have kids, and I'm going to do all these things in my life that I should do at this certain time. And when we don't hit those expectations or milestones, it all turns on its head, and we become very depressed and, unhappy with ourselves because we didn't achieve goals that for some reason were programmed into us from a young age. Combination of societal expectations, combination of, pressure, combination of seeing our peers achieving certain things that we thought we should achieve. And it's interesting because that seems to guide us a lot through these paths where, we may not actually be happy on that path, but we think it's the right path because society tells us it is. So I've gone through a lot of things in my life thinking that that was the case and making a lot of sacrifices and realizing the hard way that actually it did not serve me. So through my med school years, I really wanted to do general surgery, and then I went through that whole process and enjoyed things about it. But then it got turned on its head when I, did a run as a house officer, and I wasn't treated well by colleagues that I worked with. And I kind of like shifted my perception of, okay, well, I don't actually enjoy this. I can't imagine doing this because I don't even want it to turn up to work. Because, when you're feeling like you're being bullied or you're feeling like you're not being treated well, it's very hard to get that motivation to keep going to work. When that happened, it changed my perception again of maybe this isn't for me. But then I was kind of lost. Like, what do I do now? So then I went down the path of doing the runs as you do. So when you're a junior doctor in your first year before you get your general registration, you're an intern basically, where you have to do a certain number of runs to get signed off before you can have general registration. I was doing those runs and then I sort of thought, I'm not really sure. And then I kind of I really did enjoy my orthopedic surgery run. And then I was asked to maybe consider doing that long term by one of the senior registrars because, they needed more women and I still really liked the aspects of surgery. And so it opened up a door to me that I didn't understand or really see as a possibility before then. So that was interesting. The door opened, I walked through. I really enjoyed that. I also did a run as an ED house officer, thinking, maybe that was also cool because I quite like the acute medicine. But then I didn't like it at that time. I found it very draining. I found it very hard. There was a lot of long hours. It just felt very heavy. So it didn't feel like it was for me. I went on to do orthopedics for 2.5 years, which was amazing. I loved orthopedics. I was very keen on doing it long term, and I still have a very soft spot for orthopedics. However, as my life shifted, my perception shifted too. So this expectation I had where I was working long hours and getting my CV ready for, applying for the official training program in orthopedic surgery, you've done all these sacrifices, you're working towards this goal, but then you start to realize, is this really what I want? I had met my husband and we wanted children. And so when you start to think about that, you go, well, how is that all going to fit? I'm doing crazy long hours. I feel like I'm always on catch up. I work 6 days a week. I work 1 in 4 weekends. And when I work 1 in 4 weekends, I work 12 days in a row. And that can't get less because as a surgical registrar, you need as much time in theatre as possible to get good at your job. You can't work less because your skills won't be up to the mark when you're operating on people. It's a pretty big deal. So it's a system that just, felt to me at my point in my career that it wasn't conducive to the life I wanted, and there was a devastating story about, a surgeon, out in the provinces who, inadvertently left a child in a car because they were so tired and, distracted and they sort of, I think they were on call or something. There was a thing where the child was left in the car and, devastatingly the child didn't survive. And it really rattled the surgical community because it really made everyone think, oh my God, we are that tired that, we could imagine doing something like that, which is terrifying to think of. And I remember feeling in my mind that, gosh, I feel like I could be that tired that, I could make a mistake like that because, I think everyone understood what it is to be that tired. Because when you're working long hours, that's how it is. And some people are great at it. Some people, that's just their jam. Some people can function very well. I'm one of those people that like sleep. And certainly when I had kids, I learned that the hard way, that it feels like you're on call all the time. And, I struggled a lot in my postpartum periods because I found it very hard to not have sleep. And so some people just function better with sleep than others. And I'm not one of those people. And so I sort of realized that I could not have a life as like a mother that was, wanting to be with my kids a lot, but also be able to do something in my job that's a very intense job that requires a lot of work and a lot of commitment. So you reach this crossroads, and it's a very hard crossroads to get to because you start to wonder, all these expectations, all the stuff you've worked towards, what was it for? And the other interesting thing is that there's a great analogy with that in, say, relationships, I've had bad relationships before I met my husband. And certainly when you're in those relationships, you invest over a long period of time, you start to go, well, I've made it this far. I should keep investing because, we don't want to waste our time. But it's interesting looking back at that now and going, interesting that you didn't just leave it sooner because you would have escaped less wasting of your time. And so people don't really see it like that. We have this perception that we've invested this far, so we have to keep going, versus if something's not serving you, perhaps you could escape it sooner and not waste any more time. But I learned that the hard way myself. So another really good piece of advice, I guess, from my own experience. But the same transitions into career. So with career, making that decision to maybe not do orthopedics for myself was tricky. And, like escaping the hospital and trying to do something different, I found urgent care, which is, like it's an A&E. So it's halfway between general practice and emergency medicine, and it's in the community, and it has nicer hours. It had a better working conditions for what I was looking for my children, to be able to have kids and still be able to feel like I'm, being very present in their lives. And that was interesting, and that, it really helped me. But making that transition from this huge, machine of what is the hospital system, where you're a cog in a wheel and you're very much primed to be doing it this way, like, you should have continued. I did experience a lot of resistance. A lot of my peers, kind of made me feel bad, or made me sort of doubt myself, doubt my decision to leave the hospital, doubt my decision for changing my circumstances to suit myself. And it's probably because I was, maybe tricking them in a certain way that, made them feel uncomfortable. We're all supposed to play by the rules. Why are you not playing by the rules? People often do that. People often do want you to justify their decision. So if they've made sacrifices to do it a certain way, they want you to do the same because, it kind of justifies their sacrifices. It's a funny way that humans, kind of think. But when you see it for what it is, it's very clear, rather than just being happy for you that you're doing something that makes sense to you. There were people who were supportive of me too, but it was a hard kind of transition, and it was scary. But it was one of those things where I felt like my life had reached a crossroads. I was at the edge of a cliff and I had to jump away because there was no alternative. I just couldn't keep doing what I was doing, and I couldn't achieve the life I wanted to with a new family by, staying in the hospital system. So I jumped. And when you do that, you jump out of your comfort zone. It's terrifying. But when you experience discomfort, it actually means you're going to grow. And it was one of the hugest launch pads for me, for my growth, in the sense that my life became a very much more, I feel like I had more control of my life. I feel like I had just a better work-life balance, which is what I needed at that point when I had children. I felt like I was becoming the mum that I always wanted to be, albeit it was hard naturally with not much sleep. But at the same time, I felt like I could be present, and that was really important to me. And, some people have different priorities, and that's okay. Like some people, they don't want to spend a lot of time with their kids, especially when they're young. They might like to have help. There's different ways of doing it, but this is very much my journey, and one that I didn't expect that I would feel this way about, because when I was young, I didn't even know I was going to have kids. So getting to that point, adhering to my needs, respecting my needs, but also having to experience a lot of resistance from a lot of people along the way to achieve that was hard. But the upshot of that was that it was amazing. So when you feel like you're getting to the edge of your comfort zone, like you're getting cornered, you're getting to the point where you know that your situation is not working, you just can see that it's not working, it can feel very suffocating. And a lot of people probably just stay in that comfort zone because they're too scared to jump out. But when you jump out, it's just the most amazing thing. Like, you can't actually achieve great things in this life with staying in your comfort zone. The comfort is like a drug. It really is. If you stay in your comfort zone, you don't exercise, you don't make life changes, you don't, do things for the better. You don't jump out of things. You just cycle down because it's conducive to depression because you're not achieving it. As humans, we are naturally designed to be productive, and when we become productive and we achieve things that we want to, it is very rewarding. We get massive highs from it and energy from it, and our life shifts. And you can't really have more doors open if you've got all of them closed around you. So when I took that leap, it was like a really big door I forced open, and then all these other doors opened for me. So it was interesting how it worked. So that was a huge starting point for the change in a career that I wasn't really sure I was going to make, but it was the hugest payoff I could imagine. So after that, I finished my training in urgent care. My kids became a little bit older, I got some more time back, and started getting a bit bored with urgent care, if I'm honest. When you finish your training in it, I wanted to keep growing, and I was working in various places that I felt like I wasn't valued and wasn't achieving what I wanted to. So I started looking for other things and, thinking, well, I do miss the procedural stuff that I used to do with orthopedic surgery. I miss the surgical aspects, but I don't want to train as a surgeon because I know that that lifestyle is something that I don't feel like I could adhere to long term. So I ended up discovering cosmetic medicine, which is so interesting. And that sort of was stumbled across by, talking to different people, friends, in my life about things that were sort of, a priority to me and what I could be good at. And then finding that pathway. So when I looked into cosmetic medicine, I discovered that New Zealand offers this amazing diploma for vocationally registered doctors. So that means that doctors who are qualified in another specialty. So for me, I was a fellow of urgent care. So when you go into it, you have a 3-year diploma that really covers everything. So it's so much stuff. It's fantastic. It covers anatomy, it covers rheology, it covers physiology, it covers aging and anti-aging and all the things, because I think cosmetic medicine is underestimated in that people often just think of it as this very superficial thing that's just a nothing kind of thing, and there is a lot of stuff in New Zealand and just probably actually around the world where people, think that it can just be done by, at your hairdressers or something, but it's a medical procedure. So it should be treated as such and always adhered to as such and respected as such, because complications can and do happen and need to be treated properly. And someone practicing it needs to be very ethical in the way they deliver it, that they're not going to force you to do anything that you don't want. So that's why we have things like therapeutic advertising regulations. It's why NZSCM, the New Zealand Society of Cosmetic Medicine, is a regulatory body for cosmetic medicine in New Zealand. But I found it kind of interesting in the start of learning about this before I did the diploma, in that, how easy it is for people just to do like a weekend course and suddenly they are supposedly qualified in doing injectables. And that was quite confronting for me, because I come from a background in orthopedic surgery where, you're watching an operation like many times, and you're sitting in clinics with your boss and you're learning from your consultant, and you're sort of seeing the way they're managing problems. So you're shadowing people, you're learning on the job, and you're also doing your own learning as well, like studying at home. But when you're actually in it and you're seeing things repetitively, only then do you get considered to be able to do certain procedures on people. And yes, okay, surgery is surgery, but I would argue that a lot of the procedures in cosmetic medicine are like surgical procedures. This is why I find them really interesting and enjoy doing them, because it requires a lot of skill. It requires a lot of technical skill. And I would actually almost argue that it can be harder than surgery sometimes, because it's imaginary anatomy. So when you're in surgery, you have an approach to a bone, say in orthopedic surgery, you learn the approach, say the Henry approach of the forearm, you learn the approach down to the bone so that you can fix the bone with, say, plate and screws, whatever, and then you close it up and you do it the same way. Whereas when you do something like a cosmetic procedure, say you're doing filler on someone, when you're doing that, you're actually seeing the way they're aging. So you're trying to see where the deficits are. You're also trying to predict what deficits they're going to continue to have. You're going to figure out how it all balances with their other features, because we all have our own individual features, and what would make it look good. You're also taking into account budget as well, because people can't afford, crazy amounts of filler. And so you want to provide a treatment that's going to give someone bang for their buck as well. As well as on top of that, you can't actually see what's happening under the skin. You have to learn the anatomy in such extreme detail. So you know where all the blood vessels are, where all of the layers are, like the different layers, like there's 10 layers in the temple, for example. You've got to know all of those things and understand where you're putting the filler and what layer it's going into, so that you'll know that you're going to get a good result. In addition to that, you're also wanting to avoid putting in a blood vessel, because if you block a blood vessel, that's a bad thing. But also you want to make sure that it's the right filler and the right layer that's going to achieve the result, because the filler is a gel that mimics different tissues in the face. So softer fillers, are going to be put more superficial or in areas that are moving more, and firmer fillers are going to be trying to mimic bones, so they're going to go deeper. And there's no point putting a soft filler in a deep part, because it's just going to get metabolized quickly. It's not going to do anything. And the same goes with the reverse. If you put a firm filler in a superficial part, like close to the skin surface, it's going to look weird. You're going to see a lump there and no one's going to like it. So it's about figuring out what's going to give someone longevity as well. And that again goes back to their budget and bang for their buck. But there's so many things to think about. And so it's interesting in that, well, probably in all countries, but in New Zealand, for example, that you have a lot of people who will just do the most basics of things with their treatments, in terms of learning them, very cookie cutter approach. And I sort of argue that the analogy is really like, if you're freehand painting versus, you're doing, stencil painting, because stencil painting, you're just going to do it like whatever is pre-populated onto people. And, that might work for a reasonable number of people, but eventually it won't work for everyone. And that's perhaps why people do start looking weird as well. But at the same time, if you've got a freehand approach, but to develop an eye for that, I would argue part of it is a natural eye for art as well. I feel like I was very artistic as a child, and so I really enjoy that aspect as well. You're kind of sculpting in real time, but also you're doing freehand, but also you understand all the anatomy so that you're also putting it in the right places in a freehand approach that gives you the best outcome. So there's quite a big imbalance and difference, and I found that really fascinating when I learned about cosmetic medicine. So it's like really important for people to understand that injectors do have different backgrounds, and so you really do need to see someone who does have a good solid background and understanding of anatomy and where it all comes from, and also understanding of how things work. And so the training for doctors in New Zealand is significantly more extensive than what potentially could be offered by other people. So just, as just a side note, being aware that there are quite a bit of different training kind of levels. So if you see any injector asking what their training is and what their background is, because if they don't have much of a background, then that could be a bit of a red flag that perhaps, if you encounter a problem or, something happens, that you may not be dealing with someone who really understands what's going to be the best way to fix that. And so, that opened my eyes to, wow, I can train in this and I can go down this path. And what a joyful path that has been, the learning of something that is completely new. It is not taught in med school. It's very niche. It's interesting that it is so not taught in med school to the point that the reversing agent for filler, hyaluronidase, is actually not even thought of or stocked in the hospitals. So if you turn up to hospital with a vascular occlusion or some other horrible complication of filler, the people are not going to know what to do about it, and there have been cases of that in the past. So, it's so interesting learning about a completely different aspect of medicine, but taught in such a great way. Excellent speakers. But also it was just great because it preyed on all the anatomy, because I love anatomy with, surgery background, but also, the facial anatomy, but also how we age and how we can benefit from that. And then kind of learning a new language, you're sort of learning how to understand about, what is a filler and what are the different types of filler? What's the rheology of filler? What is the correct choice, and all the muscles of the face and how they interact and what can cause things to be flattering, say if you use Botox. So there's so much to it. And I think cosmetic medicine's often kind of underestimated in that how scientific it really is. It's very glamorous, and, people definitely put on social media, like, look at me, I'm very fashionable or whatever, but it actually has a lot of science. It has a lot of grit and gut to it. And I think that's what makes it so cool. It's multifaceted, and the beauty of it as well is that, it encourages you, or at least enables you, to think about creating your own path. So with me, it was creating my own business, like my own clinic, like ALLOR. The name stems from All or Nothing, which is the sort of person I am, hence the podcast name, All or Nothing. And it's just because I believe in doing things properly or not bothering at all. So I got to create that and then go on a beautiful journey of learning about owning a clinic, running a clinic, and expanding a clinic, which I still have visions of growing in the future. But just being able to be on this journey that I didn't realize I would ever carve for myself. And it's beautiful because it's sort of every experience I've had, even the bad experiences in certain jobs I've worked at, they were really a launching pad to where I am today. So looking at life, that no experience is ever wasted. It never is. It may have felt like crap at the time, but certainly when you look back and go, wow, if I didn't have that experience, I would have been forced into a crossroads to make a decision that now I'm benefiting from significantly. So it's sort of interesting in that it kind of evolves into this. And if you told me, 10 years or so ago, this was what I was going to be doing, I would kind of laugh in your face that there's no way. And it's funny because it goes against the grain. It's very left field, but it is the most joyous thing because for me personally, cosmetic medicine does marry together all of my interests, like aesthetics, science, anatomy, procedures, also now growing a business in a way that I want it to be very ethical and very, kind and very, just like offering knowledge, like what I'm doing on this platform here, which I feel very passionate about. Every time you learn about something, it's interesting. Anti-aging is interesting. I know that's probably why you're listening to me right now, because it is interesting. We don't like aging naturally, but we do, there's lots of things, and it's early in its profession, in the sense that cosmetic medicine, there's still so much research, and there's always going to be research on this, because hey, we all want the potion to, stop looking like we're aging. And, there's so many cool modalities that we use. So, for example, filler is something that people are often really scared of, but it's probably the best thing that you can use to really change the way someone looks, because it changes structure in your face. It's important, though, that the person doing the filler understands, though, your anatomy, understands how to reverse it, and also understands that it's something that, should be only done in a certain type of person. Like if you've got a medical problem, that means it's not safe. Like it's something that has to be carefully considered, but it can achieve such amazing changes to people's faces. And it really rivals like surgical things like facelifts, because if it's done well and tastefully, and it replaces the volume losses you're having over time in a really good way, then you may never need a facelift either. So it's just really amazing to be able to do that. Filler also is really great because it's such a complicated thing to learn when you're studying cosmetic medicine. I really enjoyed learning about all of the aspects of it, particularly because it's so complicated. And I think it's what people take for granted as well. And so really excites things inside of you that, you're learning this new thing. It's like learning a new language. And it's so rewarding when you go down that path, because you're seeing things in a completely different light. Like you're starting to see how people's faces look, in a completely different way. You're secretly analyzing everyone's faces without realizing, because that's just what you're taught to do. So it's fascinating. And then further along the lines of cosmetic medicine, which makes me really happy about it and excited, is that, Botox is a beautiful thing to use. It's so fascinating how you can just tweak little things and muscles to just make someone look really refreshed and happy. And there's so much science to back up how it actually makes people feel happy, because it rewires their brain to no longer interpret the frowning, for example, signals, and therefore feel grumpy. So, there's even evidence to say it treats depression. So it kind of has this flow-on effect from so many things, and that was a wonderful thing to learn about. And then you have other modalities. So you've got skin treatments that really awakens the skin, like microneedling and chemical peels, and injectable treatments like Profilo and NCTF. These are all things that really help the skin change the way that it does things. So it wakes up the skin, and in conjunction with really good skincare, it does actually elevate your skin so you look really healthy and glowy. And when people see that, when they come into my clinic and see how good they look and how much they can see that they glow, it's just like a priceless kind of thing. It sort of all comes a full circle where you're like, oh yeah, I see why I'm doing this now. I see why I love what I do, because I love having people feel so good about themselves. And again, still staying true to the fact that you have to have good self-worth to be able to really benefit from that. But, I always take time to talk to patients about, their feelings about things anyway, because I do believe that we as injectors have a responsibility to talk to our patients, not just about the treatment, but about the rationale and about their feelings behind it, and about why are they feeling a certain way? Like there's a lot of guilt and shame that people can have for having cosmetic procedures. And, it comes from just society telling us that, we don't do this thing, self-care is like hush hush. It's not something that we should do. But guilt means you're doing something wrong, and having self-care and doing cosmetic treatments is not doing something wrong. It's doing something really right, and something that makes you feel good about yourself. That can never be something wrong. Like you're not hurting anyone by doing it. You're not, like I don't know, I guess doing any crimes by doing it, but people feel that way because of what society's taught them. So trying to educate people about that and changing their perceptions of that and making them feel good about their decisions is just such a priceless thing that I can achieve in doing my clinic. And so it's a beautiful thing, like changing the career path to that and discovering so much interest and so much grit behind what this sort of specialty is. That is such a niche specialty, but when embraced for the right reasons and when practiced in the right way, really makes differences in people's lives. It's a beautiful place to be, but it is not something that was conventionally sought after, nor it was something that I even considered. But I feel so grateful to have found it. And the irony is, after all of the time of me going away from the hospital, I now work in the hospital again, and I've transitioned from doing urgent care now into working in the emergency departments in the hospitals, and I love it. And I think it's enabled me to grow. It's enabled me to, just learn. There's always so many amazing people that you work with. It's so inspiring. It's another way of growing. And we've got to think about life in terms of growth, because if you just, I always say that perception, if you just stay to this point, I want to reach that point where I'm not working much and I'm just like, doing stuff with the kids. That sounds great. And that might be what makes you very happy. But for me personally, I found like I needed to be more productive. I found that I needed to find something that really gets me going. So then I have more capacity for my children, for example, because I feel fulfilled in my own career and my own productivity, and then that spills over to them. So it's one way of filling my cup. And I think that I would encourage everyone to do things like that, or think of their career in a sense that they have more power to choose a nonlinear path than what they realize. You really can choose a nonlinear path, but it does unfortunately encounter a lot of resistance, because every time you're going to jump out of a comfort zone of changing a career path or doing things in a non-conventional way, you're going to trigger a lot of people around you, because people don't like you not playing by the rules because they play by the rules. And I respect that. And that's okay. That's human nature. But ultimately, though, this is our life and this is our career and no one else's. So you shouldn't do something like follow a career path just because someone else did it their way. If you are inspired by that person and you want to continue to follow what that person's done because it makes sense to you, then great, embrace that. I completely support that and embrace that. But just remember why you're doing it as well. Like, are you doing it for the kudos? Are you doing it, again, to fill a hole that you have inside of you? Are you doing it, because it was just the pressure of what you should do? I still think back to the days of when I was at high school, and weirdly I was good at graphics. I enjoyed drawing the perspective pictures of houses and things, and I was told, oh, you should become an architect, and I thought, oh my god, that's not me at all. And it was interesting. It was such an interesting experience, even back when I was younger, because I was, I found it very complimentary that, teachers would say, oh, you should do this, because, it's great when someone kind of, embraces a skill that you didn't know you had. And it's interesting in that, when people compliment you, you feel very validated by them, saying things like that about you. And so you start to think about changing your career path or making choices because, hey, well, they say I'm good, so I may as well just do it. But in actual fact, it comes from the inside. Like the validation that you only need is what you give yourself, and you don't need it from anyone else. But it's still great to take on those compliments, and you should take on those compliments. It's lovely that someone notices a skill in you that is great, and they want you to embrace that because they see a potential in you. But that doesn't mean that you have to follow that path. It's great if they open the door to you, like with orthopedic surgery. Like for me, that was perfect timing because it was a great time in my life, and everything I did in my time in orthopedics has made me better at doing my other doctoring as an emergency doctor now, which is amazing because, those skills, nothing is ever wasted. So every experience you have is not wasted. So you have to basically go through life leaving no stone unturned. And I think that's the best advice I can give anyone, especially people starting out in their career. Or maybe you're later in your career and you're feeling like, I'm bored, like I don't know what I'm doing. I have so much more in me. Maybe I'm not being valued. We think of this conventional life where we have to climb up this career ladder, but I argue that, you can create your own ladder. If you just have that confidence in yourself and that good self-worth, you know what you bring to the table, you're going to achieve something. And it is going to piss a lot of people off because you're going to, do things that maybe they wanted to deep down, but it makes them feel very insecure that maybe they never had the guts or the drive to do it. But leave those people on the sidelines, because the people who really, really care about you will support you and embrace you and be happy for you, because they're not threatened by it. We shouldn't be threatened by other people's success. We should embrace it and be inspired by it. And that's a huge turning point. And that's something that I think a lot of people need to remember, because there's a lot of pressure, especially in different careers, especially when you're early on in your career and you feel like you want to impress people and you want to do it a certain way and, you don't want to, piss people off. But I would say do what feels right and know that your life is not linear, so your career doesn't have to be. So even though right now in your life you might be early in your career and you might be thinking, I don't have kids, I can't even imagine having kids, and now I'm just focusing on that and I want to do X, Y, and Z. cool, go with that. But just keep your mind open. You don't know what's going to happen along the way. What if an opportunity comes up to go overseas? What if you wanted to volunteer? What if, some other, cool thing comes out? There's so much more to what is at hand that we can use than what we realize. And I think just opening people's eyes to that it actually could be a beautiful thing to go down an unconventional career path. And I certainly consider it one of my hugest achievements that I've managed to get to this point in my career where I'm so happy. And I've created a lovely balance for myself where I can work in acute medicine and also do cosmetic medicine and also spend time with my kids and be able to do things like this with a podcast and, and try and, educate people, but also, talk about these issues that I feel like people don't talk about enough. So embrace your career, but embrace your own path and don't be scared to go on your own path and expect people to be triggered by you along the way. Expect people to want to take you down, but stay true to yourself and know that whatever path you take is right for you and know what you bring to the table. And if something doesn't work out the way you didn't think it was going to, then oh well, it's going to be an upgrade. Redirection is an upgrade. See everything as an upgrade. So when one door closes, 100% more doors open, but it might not feel like it in the moment. But if you have constant belief in yourself that you're manifesting this positive path for yourself, you're going to end up being a very happy person who becomes very fulfilled. But it may not feel like it in the moment, but I can completely 100% vouch for the fact that every setback I feel like I've had in life happened for a reason, and it led me to the point that I am today. And I expect more setbacks to happen in the future, just like any human would. But I expect they direct me in a different direction that becomes an even better direction. So manifesting that positivity gets you through, and it really gives those rewards. So embrace your career, get out of it what you want, leave no stone unturned. Find out what gets you going where you don't really feel like you're working. Like for me, this and cosmetic medicine, it doesn't feel like work. And so when you're doing something like that, that's great. You're embracing it. It becomes natural. It becomes easy. It becomes effortless, kind of like a good relationship. You're with the right person when it's effortless and, you're not having to force anything. Same thing with a career. So, and that's not to say you have to have a career. Just do whatever makes you happy. Really look at your life and feel like, I just love spending time with my kids and that's me. Great, embrace that. Or if you're feeling like this isn't quite me, go to the next thing. Just keep choosing things that feel right and your heart will guide you and eventually it will all make sense. So that's kind of what I wanted to share in this. I really, hope that I could inspire some people maybe by listening to my own experiences and just remembering that it's okay to not be, linear with your career choices. But if you do have any questions, please email me. Ask Dr. Heather at allor.co.nz. You can find me on Instagram at ALLOR Cosmetic Medicine. I also have the Instagram for this podcast at the All or Nothing Podcast. And we also are on YouTube and Spotify and iHeartRadio. Also, please, I do have a website if you want to learn more about me and my clinic, www.allor.co.nz. So stay tuned. Next episode, we'll start covering topics about why people go too far with certain treatments. I think that's an important topic to discuss because there's lots to unpack there where people can just, go a bit too far. And we need to figure out why that is so we don't end up doing that ourselves. But until then, take care and I look forward to talking next time.